This game, Clair Expedition 33, was something that took me some time to get into. And it wasn't because it was a game that I thought I wouldn't like. I love new RPGs and old RPGs, and a lot of the reasons why people wanted to love this game when it came out was simply because it reminded them of older RPGs of the day. And I love old RPGs, especially the JRPGs of their time. I don't quite understand the hate for new RPGs as well. They're different, but that doesn't mean that they're necessarily bad. And when a lot of the discussion around the game, especially from RPG or JRPG communities, is all around oh my god, this takes me back, there's a part of me that gets me a little bit skeptical, because then it makes me feel okay, well, if I like certain things of new JRPGs, am I gonna not like this game then? Or is this a game that, anyone can enjoy? Did the devs just think about something where they just wanted to make a good game? With all that being said, I went into Expedition 33 not knowing what was gonna happen. I avoided as much as I could. I did not follow any of the controversies around it until I found out until after I beat the game. I did not delve into the story or nothing. The combat I just knew was turn-based, and that's kind of all I knew from it. I didn't see a trailer, nothing. I didn't hear about this game at all. And this is one of those games that, especially as someone that turned 29, right? When you know the background of the story and everything, it just hits differently as an adult. And I'm starting to realize that maybe the love for this game isn't necessarily because it's taking you back or whatever. Maybe for the a certain audience it does, and I could see it. And I do love the classic elements of old JRPGs in this thing, and I do like the elements of new JRPGs in this thing as well. And they are there, and I can talk about that for a little bit. The discussion I want to have today is not necessarily going to be about a review, but just how this game had affected me emotionally, and how it relates to me as an adult that has less and less time for himself growing up, and had his own challenges with going through a grieving process. I would say the last 2 to 3 years, and how grieving is something that everyone handles completely differently. And this is what this game is about. And the way that this game handles its story and its themes and everything is simply beautiful. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to really talk in depth, and I'm going to try my best not to have a script. I do have an outline on my phone, just so I don't just completely ramble. I do want to make sure that this video is from the heart and it's not scripted or anything. So I hope you guys enjoy this. I will have timestamps for different things. I will maybe include light spoilers just as a heads up in the beginning, and then maybe more heavy spoilers towards the end of this video. And I'll let you know when that happens. But if you are curious, if you want to try Expedition 33, if it's a game for you, all I can say is, even if you don't like turn-based RPGs, I would say give it a shot. If you can get through the first 2 to 3 hours and you feel like, you don't like this game, then don't continue. But if the first 2 to 3 hours intrigues you or affects you in any way, I would say continue going forward. So let's go ahead and get started. The first thing I want to talk about is the tone of Expedition 33. This game has a very interesting tone because it is a depressing game at points, and very depressing, right in the beginning. It can be incredibly melancholic and unforgiving, and it knows how to tug at your heartstrings in all the right ways. And at the same time, it balances that very well with really good humor. And that's something I did miss from, the last Final Fantasy I played through was Final Fantasy 16, and there are almost no moments of levity in that game. And so playing this game was quite refreshing, because 16 is just depressing the whole way through. And I did cry when I played Final Fantasy 16. I enjoyed that game. I don't think it's my favorite in any way, but there was very emotional moments, and it was a very depressing game and all that. But I also cried here, but there were also moments of levity and fun, and the characters really get along, and I really feel like they all connected to each other. The tone of this game was stellar, and I have very little bad things to say about the tone. Like, they balanced it very, very well, and the moments of levity and the melancholic stuff, it never felt unnatural. Like, it never like went from one extreme to another really quickly. They did a good job of like doing everything at an appropriate time. Maybe if you do some side content, it could be a little jarring sometimes, but that's just side content. You can't really control how, you navigate that. But at the same time, it still worked. It still worked incredibly well. And there's a lot of those moments in this game with these characters. They feel so human, and I think that's the best thing that this sets. It's the tone. The tone is one of the best things about this game. I do also want to talk about the theme of grief and how Clair Obscure, and this is when I'm going to start getting to some spoiler stuff, is essentially, it's a game about grief and how grief follows these characters in different ways. Every character in this game is grieving in some way or another. Even SKA, the lovable, innocent SKA, even he has a grieving process. And I think even with a character that's that positive, it's nice to know that they also have to go through that process as well. No one is immune to having to grieve something in life, whether it's a lost friendship, the death of a loved one, a relationship, whatever. Everyone grieves something at some point. I worry about my cat and stuff as she gets older, and there's little things like that I just think about when I think about this game, and how they handle, like, how every person's, the way they handle grief is incredibly different. Like, the way that Verso handles grief is a little bit weird because he's also the cause of a lot of the grief. The paintress is going through a cycle of grief in a way that later on directly affects her daughter and directly affects the people around her, very much so. The father is trying to speed run, his process of grief. All of these little ways, even Lune and CL. CL handles grief through amazing positivity. Somehow she could do it. I don't know how she does it. I mean, she has definitely moments where she gets emotional and vulnerable, but most positive person in this game. And then Lune goes through grief in her own way too. It's very, I guess the best way I can describe Lune's grief is she goes through it in a way where it's like, because she has the grief, that's her motivation to continue to work. The way she handles grief is by putting, I'm going, these people left in my life, so I have to make sure that all of the things I'm doing is not for nothing. And I think that's beautiful in a weird way, because I think that's the closest way I handle grief is, I have to make things work. Otherwise, what was the point? and I also I don't really handle things, I don't connect with other, I will talk about more about how I connect to things later, but I very much align with the way that Lune deals with her grief. And I found that to be interesting because everyone's talking about like Renoir and Aline and Maëlle and Clea. Everyone talks about the family, but I really latched on to this other character in the canvas. So I thought that was interesting. The feeling of grief, I think, is incredibly relevant in this game and in this story. And Gustave and Verso are, I think, my favorite characters in the game, along with Lune. I think that I love every single character, even the ones that people give, shit to, and we could talk about that deeper when I talk about the ending later in this video. But Verso and Gustave are definitely my favorites. And I think about all the characters in this game and how they all deal with this cycle of grief, and I think they handled this very beautifully. So the characters I love, the theme of grief I love as well. Before I get into other things though, I would like to briefly talk about the combat, and I would also like to talk about the music. So combat in this game is nothing extraordinary. I wouldn't say it's anything like that I haven't seen before. Like, a lot of people talk about the parrying system, but if you played Mario and Luigi, those games, it's very interactive as well. And there's also ways to dodge and parry in those games as well. And there's other games, other turn-based RPGs that allow you to interact to keep you engaged. So it's not just like one turn like a Pokemon thing. It also mixed elements of like Final Fantasy X. So it was definitely turn-based, but you could see who was next in the turn-based ranking, which I really, really liked. So there's definitely some influences of great RPGs and JRPGs of the past and combining those to make something spectacular. But the thing I can say is, even though this I wouldn't say this combat system is revolutionary in any way. It is incredibly polished. And I think it was also really nice to look at combat through AP instead of mana or magic. And I think that was a wise choice as well, because it really had you think about how you're going to utilize your turns in the game. And I found that to be very exciting, and I think the combat flowed very well, and it's very, very challenging. There's, even you can get killed by some world map enemies, you know what I mean? Like, you can definitely get over leveled, but, basic enemies, if you're not parrying or dodging, it's very unlikely that you'll make it to the end unless you play in the story mode setting. But I played in the expeditioner setting, like the middle setting. I didn't do the hard difficulty, but I did do the middle setting where it's not easy, not hard. It's just, I guess, the difficulty that the game presented. But I found that that was a good difficulty for me, because I found this game to be quite challenging. You can avoid fights in this game, but I would say if you want to level up properly, you want to try to level up. Which leveling up in this game is actually quite easy. You can level up quite quickly with regular enemies on the field. You don't have to go and grind anywhere. I didn't feel that need to grind. But another thing I would like to praise the combat for really quickly is how it combined story. So there were moments, especially with boss fights, and this is something that happens in a lot of old school RPGs, where they do a really good job. It's not just combat, but there's story that's happening through combat. And I'm not talking about the cutscenes that happen, in the story. I'm talking about certain actions that characters will do. And what I mean by that, there is a boss towards the end of Act 2. And one of the things that she does is she heals one of the main characters. And I found that to be really, really interesting. And I also found that some of those moments showed up in other battles as well. But that was just one that really, really stood out to me. And that was something that I hadn't experienced in an RPG in quite some time. I think the last time I really, really experienced that was Final Fantasy X. Quick spoilers for Final Fantasy X. When you're fighting the final boss, Sin, you can talk to him, and that lowers his stats. And it has, you don't have to do that, but it's a story thing that's implemented into the game, and they do little things like that in this game, and I really, really, really like that. I love when combat and story mesh together. I think it creates something really beautiful. And finally, before I go into some of the spoiler stuff that I really loved about this game, I would like to go into the music. Now, the music of Expedition 33. I'm gonna say something. I don't think the music's bad. I don't think there's a bad song in this soundtrack. I know I have some friends that might disagree with that, but I don't think there's a bad song in this soundtrack. I do think, however, that there's a lot of background music in the soundtrack, which is not inherently bad. If that is the vision that the artist had, I think that's fine. And there's some beautiful pieces with beautiful melodies and orchestrations and all this stuff. And there's a lot of film-esque type of music in this game. And I think when I think of video game music, sometimes I worry that the industry does move in this kind of movie kind of direction where the music is hingent on just being background noise. And one of the things I love about game music is how prevalent it is to a scene, how the melody can really carry a scene or sticks with you. And there's some film scores that do that too. You think of Star Wars or anything John Williams or Hans Zimmer writes, a lot of that stuff. Where there's melody and stuff in the scenes. So I'm not saying all film music is like that. And I'm not saying all game music has to be all melodies and not everything. And there can be some background music. But I found 70% of this soundtrack to be background music, which is fine. There wasn't a lot of melody. Occasionally there were. Anything with a vocal track is stunning and beautiful. But for me, when I think about video games, the soundtracks that stick with me, with this soundtrack, it's 8 hours long, and I'm probably only going to listen to about 30 minutes of it offline. I mean, this might change over time, but I think 30 minutes out of 88 hours of a soundtrack that I'm just going to listen to, when I'm on the road or something, is a very small amount. It works beautifully for this game, though. This is an analogy I like to think of. I had a high school teacher. I play music. And so I played drums, and I had a high school teacher that he played two scenes of a drummer. They were playing I promise this will make sense. The drummer played Hey Jude by the Beatles, and he played it just like the original track, with a little bit of, fills here and there. And then one where he was just ripping the drums. And then my teacher asked, who do you think was the better drummer? A lot of people were like, oh my God, the guy that's killing it. Like, he's killing it on the drums. And the thing that always stuck out with me is like, no, the better drummer is the one that serves the song. Because otherwise, you're taken away from the entirety of the music, right? If you're just doing a drum solo over a music track, like, it's cool, but then I'm not experiencing music, I'm experiencing your solo. And I think there's an argument to be made when it comes to like background music having this flavor in RPGs like this. So even though I can't say I'm going to listen to this entire soundtrack, I will say that this entire soundtrack is perfect for this game. And I think that is the way that, the music complements the game in those scenes is incredibly beautiful. And I think it fits the game really well. There's a lot of like leitmotifs and everything. So it's really, really well done. So from this point of the video going forward, I'm going to have some heavier spoilers, especially around the ending, and my personal connection to it, what ending I chose, and the reason why this game is going to stick with me. And it really happens with a lot of things that happen after Act 2 into Act 3. The ending I chose, just telling you straight off the bat, I'm not going to keep you in suspense. It was Verso's ending. I did end up watching Mael's ending, and you know what? I think the most beautiful thing that this game did was that it made me hesitate on the choice. I think if you had just told me the story and like what the ending was, and you told me like to choose an ending, I think I would have chose Verso's immediately without a second thought of Mael's choice. I would have been like, oh, she's in a dreamland. She's a little delulu. Like, she wants to do her own thing. Let's not encourage that behavior. Like, let's set her into reality. Like, let's let her move on the way she's supposed to, because we have things like this in real life, right? We have people that, they go through a grieving process and they escape by maybe investing too much time into video games or VR or like unhealthy substances, addictions and stuff like that. And that's a very real thing, to go through grief and like be in escape through other means, partying. Like, this is something that you experience more and more as an adult going forward. That happens especially when life wears you down, especially when you're older, I would say. But a lot of younger people could get stuck in this trap, and I think Mael gets a lot of shit with the way that she chose her ending, but I think a lot of people forget that she's a 16-year-old girl that is mute, that is scarred, and deformed now in a way. And I think that's something that people forget. Like, that must not be easy. You're not just mourning the loss of your brother, but the life you have, comparing that to the life you had before your burns, when you were able to speak and you had your youth and your looks and everything, to go to where she was missing an eye. You know what I mean? Like, that's not easy. And out of everyone in that family, she not only has to grieve, but she also has to look at it where every day she's going to look in the mirror and be reminded of what she did and what she lost. And that is incredibly hard. And I think when I think of the ending, Mael's ending in that case, I totally understand why she chooses the things that she does. Now, the thing that makes it kind of suck, don't get me wrong, is that she kind of forces Painted Verso. She forces him to live when he clearly expresses that he doesn't want to. At the same time, if you had a real life, situation that was similar, right? And a friend was telling you, like, I want to go, I don't want this life, you would tell your friend, like, no, there's so much more to live for. You wouldn't just be like, okay, then like go on. Like, you wouldn't do that. That's not something you would do. And I think that's also something too, like, where, yeah, I mean, this is a painting version of Verso, it's not the real one. And I think in a way, if you look at it like, okay, this is just the painted version, just saying he wants to like move on, or like he wants to officially die. Like, if you're keeping a dead soul, like if you're not letting them rest and go on to the afterlife, that's different. That's like keeping a ghost, right? And then that's actually kind of bad. And not kind of bad, that's horrible, that's horrific. But the way Mael is probably looking at it is like, hey, like, I don't want this person, they want to die, but I want to show them the value of life. And I think that's beautiful in a way. However, I still chose Verso's ending. And I think it's because the way I experience grief is, and the way I've learned to experience grief personally, is by sitting with the feeling and knowing that the grief does get better over time. And I think the part where Renoir really messes up And I think the thing that he doesn't completely understand is the process of grief for everyone is different, and he's processing grief by wanting to take control back of his family. He wants, like, you know what, like, I want my family just to be back to the way things were. I want to go through this together. It doesn't mean that he himself has processed the death of his son, but he has probably processed it better than everyone else, and he's trying to be the strong father. Like, that's the way I look at this character. And I think Renoir is, the way he's doing things is wrong, but I think everything he's saying is correct. And I do think he's saying the right things. And it's such a contrast once you learn the truth of everything. At first, you go into this and you're like, oh my God, I have to save these people from a Gomage and everything. And they do such a beautiful job getting you entranced with these characters like Lune and Ciel fighting for their own lives. Once you realize like what the Gomage actually is and everything, like they're literally fighting for their own lives, for their own sentience. And I think that's such a great way to do it, because you get attached to these characters and they feel real, and it's because I believe that they are. And so there's this quote early in the game where they say one person's life is not more important than the fate of Lumiere of all its people. And it's almost like foreshadowing, because it makes you make that choice at the end. I just can't imagine that going through Mael's ending, it's probably good for her in the short term, but in the long term, it does that eventually. I can't imagine it's not going to cause a collapse of the campus and the world. And so Lune and Gustave and Ciel and everything that Maëlle is painting, now it's like a fantasy where she's forcing people to be happy instead of just allowing them to be. And that's also not processing grief correctly. And I think ultimately the reason why I chose Verso's ending is because I think facing the grief, the best way to do that is with the people that are also grieving, people that have grieved, or I think in a weird way, as I'm also still learning myself how to grieve certain things in my life and forgive myself for some of the past mistakes I've made. I think the way Verso forces his sister to, he lets his own soul rest and has his sister face the truth. Like, he saves her twice almost. And I think that's really beautiful. Processing the grief together as a family, learning how to live your life after, even if it's not the same. And then coming out of it the other end is more rewarding. In a weird way, it almost puts you in a position where when in the future, if someone else in your life that's important to you is going through the same thing, you know how to be there for that person. I think there's part of me that feels like this game helped me look at grief differently. I think I've been in Maëlle's shoes, and I think I'm currently in Verso's shoes, and I'm trying to go through my grief in a healthy way with people that love me and I'm around. And I think that's why this game resonates with me, is just because of where I am and currently in my life with that process as well. That's why the ending hurts, and that's why I connect to it. And I think that's why I'm always going to remember this game. It's more personal for me. It's not just because it's beautifully written. It's not just because the combat is good, but I think it's coming in a point in my life where I actually deeply resonate with the message. And I also really truly believe that this game is a great way to help me remember to hold on to my loved ones. And that's why I will always remember Clair Obscure Expedition 33. And I will actually probably think of it, especially since I've seen and done most of the side content. I think this is going to be a top 10 game for me. I'm not going to be over the top and tell everyone that it's my new favorite game or the best game in 10 years. I don't believe that, but it's definitely up there. I could see it it's like a top 15 game at least for me. I might have to think about that and think about all the other games I've played in my life and games that are in my top 10. I might make a video about that one day. And we'll see if Clair Obscure Expedition 33 gets on that list. But I could see it there if I took the time to think about it. It's not in my top 5, don't get me wrong, but it's in a top 10 or top 15. I think so. Unless some other games I think about come into mind. But that was it. That was my discussion about Clair Obscure Expedition 33, its themes of grief, my brief discussion of the characters, the music, and all that stuff. I really, really did love this game. And I really do believe that it deserves all the praise that it's getting. kudos to Sandfall Studios. You guys cooked. You guys made a great game. You made a masterpiece. Not everyone has to like this game. I understand when people don't. It's not a game for everyone. But instead of trying to be a game for everyone, it knew which audience to go for, and it landed really well with that audience. The amount of love that this game is getting is 100% warranted, 100% deserved. And I think, I am so looking forward to their next game. If this is their first game, that's incredible. That's incredible. I cannot wait to see what they do next. So, until next time, everybody, take care, hold on to your loved ones, and I will see you in the next video. Bye-bye.